I'm going to explain the mechanism of the VIP on the 130 engine. All the engines are similar. Some of the parts are slightly different. We're starting from the front here, where the push-pull rod that goes from the propeller gets inserted, and it is what is pushing on the propeller to twist the blades through the hub. For this to work, we need an 1 3/4 prop extension in order for the propeller mechanism and this rod to clear this big nut in here. So any shorter than 1 3/4 will upset the length of this rod and so forth and so on. This is 180 millimeter from one end to the tip, and you can grind it slightly shorter if you'd like after you have it all installed the first time and you check for travel back and forth. So that goes there. It engages in this arm that, and there's a hole in the back of this, or actually a dimple that the point goes into, and so it can't slide out. And then the actuator here in my hand is what actually pushes back and forth and makes the rod go back and forth in the gearbox right over here. And when that happens, the blades turn in the propeller hub. Looking at the details of the installation, you can see that the first thing on the 130 that's bolted on is this bracket over here. It replaces 2 of the screws that originally hold the 2 halves together, the back plate and the front housing. And they're across from this hole, like one below and one above. In any case, it's the 2 first holes below the dowel pin, this one and this one. They hold this in place with 2 AN4 bolts and lock nut. Now, in order for this push-pull rod here, or this actuating arm, to align perfectly in the center of the rod that comes in from this side, we have to make sure that we space this correctly when we put it together. So in this case, we have a nylon washer on the bottom and one on the top, and then we finish it off with a larger washer, an AN washer, castellated nut, and a cotter pin. And then when we look here, it is perfectly centered on the hole. You'll notice that the rod moves a little bit from one side to the other as this goes in, because of the action of this not being straight. It's seesawing like that, so the rod will move this way and this way. Of course, the key is that it doesn't hit anything at all. The rod is always stationary inside here, and the propeller turns the tube here and turns around this rod. It's important that this rod is always under load. There's a spring in the propeller, and you want that spring to constantly push against the rod so that the rod is not loose like this or semi-loose and starts spinning and wearing out this area. But this will not happen if the spring is always pushing on the rod and this is always under load. You can check that to make sure that the propeller mechanism has never bottomed out, or that your set screw or lock nut on the front of the hub is always loose enough that the spring is able to push against this system here. Now, moving further down here, there's a guide that functions as one of the spacers for the propeller hub and takes the place of it. And basically, you're just going to install that. When you install all this, of course, a new centering bushing every time you put a new gearbox on. There's a plastic centering bushing here that's a wear item, and it's always a new one. When you put the gearbox on, make sure you put your hose on here for the breather system of the gearbox. There's a new one, by the way, that it's a different kind of rubber. It's more oil resistant. This, you can tell it's like rubber. The previous one was more spongy, and that's fine for the cooling system, but we found that it reacts with the gear oil. So this new Viton hose will be used for the breather. Now, moving out, so this will be a guide for it as it moves back and forth. You can see that once this is bolted down, this will move like that, and it helps guide it up and down. You can put a tiny bit of grease on that sometimes. And of course, when you align everything or you tighten this down, just make sure that in fact it is, you know, parallel with that bar so that it slides easily in the groove. Moving further out, we have the actuator itself, and it is just pinned and it has a cotter pin, and that's so that when it moves back and forth, it can turn in that joint, in that knuckle there. Moving back to where it mounts to the engine, it's the same location as where the alternator is mounted. So one bolt's a little bit longer. Both of the bolts are slightly longer than the original to take up for this additional 1/4 inch, but you're going to install it with the existing holes that are by the alternator, to hold the alternator. We ended up putting, this is threaded, so this screws in and threads in here, and then you want to back it off so that it, you know, pivots easily, and then we have a jam nut, put a wrench on here to lock it so you can't back off. And that's really the installation so far. And then of course you have to add the propeller on the front, and then you have to run this. You can even use a 9-volt battery if you want, with a 1 amp fuse, and you can reverse this and run it. The actuator does have a stop all the way one way and all the way the other way, so you don't have to be scared about running it all the way to the end. It'll just stop, and then you reverse the current and it'll go the other way. We also have a propeller controller that will work on this. We're also working on our ECU, or the engine control unit, being able to do something like that. So far, most of the guys are using just a toggle switch to switch power from here to here and reverse it to make the propeller go one way or the other.